karanasan po, di na ba nakasalanan ng dito?
Media educators are warning call to become press freedom.
This corruption in media will be reduced to
Good evening, you're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. Sitting in for Jing Magsaysay, I'm Amelin Veloso. Tonight we are joined by COMELEC spokesperson Director James Jimenez and Congressman Silvestre Bebot Bello, representative of the One BAP party list. So good evening and thank you for joining us here in News Cafe. So let's start first with how important is the barangay elections? I have friends who are saying that, no, we're not going to vote anymore. It's just a barangay election. It's not a national election.
Well, that's very unfortunate because you go out into the street and you see garbage piling up in front of your house. That's the barangay's fault. You go out on the street, you see children doing nothing, running around in rags. That's the barangay's fault. Why? Because the barangay is mandated by law to provide some sort of program for these children. You go to your barangay hall, there's no reading center, there's no computer there, that's the barangay's fault. And if you extend that a little further, that's the fault of people who don't vote for the barangay elections. Like I always say, no? Bad officials are put into office by good people who refuse to vote. Barangay elections are very important because they elect the officers who provide frontline services to the communities. You have a problem with anything in your community, you don't go to the city hall, you go to the barangay.
If you have a problem with your neighbor,
If you have a
should
problem
go
with
to your barangay
exactly.
first.
And can you imagine if that barangay person that you're going to is selected by someone else, not by you? Wala kang say doon. That's pretty bad. No? So people should always think that if anything, the barangay elections are more relevant to them in their personal everyday lives than a lot of other elections that they participate in. Of course, the others are flashier. But in terms of the services that can be delivered to you, the barangay elections are the most important.
Congressman Bello, with your party list, are you addressing such a concern? Are you giving more relevance to the barangay so that the residents or the barangay would know exactly what to expect from their barangay?
Actually, Amelin, Director Jimenez said everything very correctly and very accurately dahil sabi nga niya, frontline services sa barangay. Ito ang basic, natin governance natin, basic. Sa may namatay dyan, ang pinupuntahan, barangay captain.
Sikap.
May pinanganak, may nagkasakit, barangay captain. Yung mga basic needs of the frontline service, nandyan lahat. So, talagang importante ang mga barangay natin, especially ang barangay officials. That's why we thought of representing the barangay. Came up with the One BAP party list. It's a barangay ating paunlarin. Although recently it is become more relevant to change the battle cry of our party from BAP, barangay ating paunlarin, to bawal ang pork. Dahil yun natang yun ang that's the kumbaga yun ang menu for the day, for the past 2-3 months. Pero yun, ang barangay talaga, napaka-importante. On the other hand, nag-uusap kami kanina ng Director Jimenez, sabi ko, yung barangay elections is already deteriorated so seriously na parang yung
The
politics
elections?
na,
The elections has deteriorated.
to a point that has become too politicalized, to a point of becoming divisive, more divisive than uniting.
Yeah, it seems like, Director Jimenez, based on all the elections,
Right.
it does seem like na parang mas volatile ang situation when it comes to the barangay
If
elections.
you look at the law that creates the barangay and mandates the elections, it says there very clearly that the barangay elections should be non-partisan.
Okay.
Unfortunately, as the congressman said, that has changed over the years. And in fact, just very recently, I spoke to one of the officials of the Barangay Federation, and he said, you know what, let's stop pretending. Let's just remove that non-partisanship provision because alam naman natin na partisan talaga kami. So, ibig sabihin, yung pinaka-konsepto ng non-partisan barangay, parang nawala na even among the players themselves. And if you remove that whole concept, that whole philosophy from the people who are participating in the barangay elections as candidates, then it's pretty it's pretty close to irredeemable, is what I'm saying, no? Kasi yung
Parang let's
kandidato
accept
mismo,
it is partisan.
that's what they're saying. Oh, I mean, for me, from the COMELEC point of view, that's unacceptable. But it becomes very difficult to turn things around. Kasi kung yung mismong players hindi na naniniwala na dapat non-partisan sila, how can you force them back into line? In the meantime, meron pa rin naniniwalang non-partisan dapat, pero na-overwhelm sila. Kasi yung mga naniniwalang dapat kampi-kampihan na lang tayo, they have the resources, they're better organized. And so I think that's where Congressman Bell is coming from. No? It's time to shock the system, ika nga, no? To I don't know, reorient it, perhaps. Or to find a better form for it, to find a better configuration for the barangay.
Is it
In fact, Amelin, I was telling the director na we are seriously considering abolishing barangay elections and just instead come up with the legislation that will make the barangay officials appointive instead of elective.
There
I
are
think,
many calls nga either to move the election date or abolition. Is your party list going to
We are seriously
calling for
considering
that?
that. We will probably hold some, no, not some, but many consultation meetings and hearings to find out the sentiments. Although, ang inclination ko talaga is to abolish it na lang para mabawasan ito. Kasi nagiging divisive eh. Ang
Pero-
away nila, grabe, patayan.
But if it's abolished, then it means it will be nominated by the mayor.
Appointed by
the mayor.
Oo. Pero merong process yan para naman hindi masyadong kumbaga sa not leave everything to the mayor. Dahil alam nyo rin na minsan ang mayor.
Exactly. So he
pero
will clearly choose
may
then
mga
what
safety valves na
who he
we will provide
prefers.
for.
Oo. So what does the COMELEC have to say about
Well,
this?
the COMELEC, as a matter of principle, will always favor elections. But ultimately, it's the role of the COMELEC is to enforce election law. And if the law is amended, then we have to enforce the law as amended, regardless of what that law might be. No? For instance, when the ARM elections were postponed, we had no choice but we had to stand ready to do to perform the elections, even if when it was still unsure whether or not it was going to be postponed. But once it was postponed, then that was the end of the story for us. And the same thing with the barangay. No? As long as the barangay elections are still in the books as something that we need to do, then we will do them. And if you ask us, again, as a matter of principle, we will favor representative democracy.
What about the time when to hold elections? Is it possible to just time it with limited time or include it during the national elections
Well,
to lessen costs?
that's actually the biggest challenge. Prior to automation, it wasn't so much of a problem because you go from one election to the other. The problem now is that we automate the national and local elections. And there's, of course, a huge outcry about why we're not automating the barangay elections. But the law as designed requires us to have certification for the automated election system before every election, before every use.
Okay.
Which means that the time that we should be spending to certify the system for the barangay, we're actually in the middle of conducting the national elections. Because it takes about 6 to 8 months to certify.
So you no longer have time.
Walang time
Yeah.
to certify for the barangay. Now, if you were to merge the two, the national and local elections, which are already synchronized, and then idagdag mo dun yung barangay elections, that would solve the automation problem. No? But it adds a lot of complications on its own. Right now, as far as the national elections are concerned, our ballots are specific all the way to municipality. Pag sinama mo yung barangay dyan, your ballots will now have to be specific all the way to barangay, which means you're going to have 42,028 individual ballot designs. That's a lot of ballot designs. And can you imagine if you ship it? And you can't make a mistake. There's like almost zero margin of error because even if you just switch two barangays side by side, isa dyan hindi makakapag-eleksyon, di ba? Or both might not be able to hold elections. Plus, a lot of barangays have the same identifiers. So it becomes more complicated. While in theory, it's a good solution, we have to find ways to make sure that the complications are sorted out.
Okay. So how can that be done? I mean, if so you're saying because of the lack of time, so clearly we may not be able to see a barangay elections that will be using the PCOS machines. We
Yes.
might just have to go manual all
Well,
the
we
time.
will be, at least for these elections. We were also manual in 2010. I don't know how different it will be in 2016, depending, of course, on the initiatives of Congress. That might change a lot.
Well, what are the initiatives in Congress apart from? It's only now that I heard that there are those who are thinking of abolishing the barangay elections and just appointing.
Not really, Ameline.
Not
May
much.
mga congressman talaga na are also inclined to agree to that to that proposition that we should be through with barangay elections. Unang-una, magastos. Hindi magastos sa mga kandidato, magastos sa mga congressman.
At madumi sa community.
Oo.
Yung mga posters.
Mas matindi pa ang postering nila ngayon kaysa mga senators.
Well, it's just a few days till election day.
Yeah.
What are the major
5 days.
concerns now that we're looking at?
Well, the major concern of everyone is that these campaigns, they go on until the wee hours of the morning.
Okay.
You know, sometimes some of them start at 3 a.m. And they start blaring their horns, or they have this whole ati-atihan thing going through the streets at 5 in the morning.
Hindi ba bawal yun?
Hindi bawal kasi
Noise
yun eh.
pollution.
Hindi bawal yun eh. And that's the most common complaint that we're receiving nowadays. A lot of people seem to have been following the 2 by 3 feet rule. And so that's okay. Not a lot of people are complaining about the placement of the posters. Although pag may nakita tayo, we do take steps to correct that. But far and away, the biggest concern of the public is that these campaigns are disrupting their sleep. You know, they're campaigning at 3 o'clock in the morning. And unfortunately, I always tell them that this part of the campaign is not regulated.
Okay, so in the meantime, we still have a lot to discuss with our guest. News Cafe will be back after these messages. You're still watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel, and we are still joined by our guests, COMELEC spokesperson Director James Jimenez and Congressman Sylvester Bello of 1BAP. So, okay, so we've talked about the problems that you're looking at now. Well, let's go to Zamboanga and Bohol. The elections there have been postponed, and it's moved to November 25.
That's
Is
right.
there enough time?
We think so. For instance, for Zamboanga, the clearing up operation started well before we declared the suspension of elections there. So we're looking at the proper timeline for that. For Bohol, some concerns have been that they won't be able to finish reconstruction of a lot of the structures on time. And what we're saying is that that's all right.
What about the aftershocks?
Yeah, that's our main concern there. You see, our main concern as far as Bohol is concerned is, for instance, transportation routes, electricity, water. As long as those are settled, as long as those are made stable again, we can deal with all of the other problems. For instance, the schools that have been cracked or damaged, we can just hold makeshift polling centers. That's fine. Our main concern really is to wait for the earth to settle down so that the aftershocks are minimal. And second, all of the other support utilities are available. Right now, kasi they're not. It's very spotty. But by November 25, we expect that, again, like I said, at least the majority of power lines and water lines have been reestablished. People have gone back to their homes, even if the infrastructure for elections, i.e. the schools, are not 100% yet. But we will be able to hold it then. The main thing here is that we hold it before the end of the term of the candidate, of the incumbents, because we want to avoid a holdover, if at all possible.
Now, what is the COMELEC's resolution on allowing or disallowing candidates from participating in relief operations?
Our resolution has always been that we want to make sure that these relief operations are not used as campaign venues. So what we do is we regulate to a certain extent the use of their funds through these events. We're in coordination with all of the other aid-giving organizations, so everyone knows that we're watching out for that. We want to make sure that no one capitalizes on this or no one uses this as a venue for campaigning.
So what if they just attend and they just want to give out pack
as a
lunches or
rule of
pack
thumb,
relief?
it's fine. It's fine. But I guess, like I said, if you start labeling the things,
if they put their
yeah,
names,
then
or-
there are shades of vote buying.
So they
there.
can still participate in relief
Oh,
operations.
we can't stop them from doing
Okay.
that. And like I said, it's a humanitarian effort.
Mm-hmm.
You give them the benefit of the doubt, but as soon as we see that they're capitalizing on the tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
then they might be vulnerable to charges of campaign, of electioneering.
There's also a problem with, for example, aid hoarding. I'm sure Congressman, as a I don't know. I mean, what can we do about that? Is there something that we can do about aid hoarding, or partisan pa rin? Pipiliin nila kung sino ang gusto
I
nilang
think, sir,
bigyan.
in Bohol, I heard na pag hindi na raw botante, hindi na binibigyan ng aid.
I heard that
Oo,
too.
no?
I mean,
How
do we resolve that?
Into the leadership of the local government involved. Kasi ordinarily naman, I would like to give the mayors and the barangay officials the benefit of the doubt that when they distribute reliefs, then talagang dapat lahat ng mga kailangan. Walang partisan consideration. Yung mga naririnig natin siguro exaggerated na rin yun. Like for example, I heard over the radio, Mayor Rebasco, he was being blamed for sending out yung
Red Cross.
Yung Red Cross, dahil yung Red Cross would not coordinate with him. Tama naman yung si Mayor doon Kasi yung Mayor na yon, he's an organization man na pag sinabi ganitong gagawin natin para hindi lahat ng mga tao natin mabigyan ng relief goods, magagawa. Ito, ang Red Cross, ayaw nila makikoordinate sa Mayor. I think they were attributing some partisan consideration si Mayor. Pero hindi dapat bigay mo sa Mayor. They are leaders of the community. You should give them the benefit of the doubt that they will do it really for the purpose of giving these relief goods to the needy people. Lahat naman ng tao dyan affected by the earthquake. So bakit ayaw mo ibigay kay Mayor? Kasi daw baka gagamitin. Baka lang baka. Pero the responsibility is in the Mayor
Hindi ba sa DSWD, since it's a disaster?
Hindi kasi yung kasama na rin yung organization ng local government. Meron silang
Parang crisis coordinating council.
Coordinating council. Kasama na dyan It's an organized group that they're supposed to do and help in the distribution of relief goods. Ngayon, pagka nandyan yung mga nagbibigay, whether it's the Red Cross or any other organization, dapat ibigay mo sa Mayor. Kasi kung in the final analysis, it's the Mayor who is answerable to the people. Kaya, yun ang sinasabi ko, yung pagbibigay ng relief goods, it's possible na merong political, partisan consideration.
preferences
Pero
sila.
as long as they do it, and they do not violate the law in doing it, it's okay. Ganyan talaga naman ang politika
Well, pero Director Jimenez, what are the possible violations a candidate can do, especially in times nitong mga relief, in times of disasters,
it's
that you can pwede mong i-file against them?
Yeah, well, vote buying. It all boils down to an election offense, which is punishable by 6 months to 6 years, and disqualification from holding office. So shades of election offenses can be discerned here. But again, it all depends really on the circumstances, which are specific to that situation.
Will there have to be somebody who will file a case against a politician or against a candidate
Yes.
for the COMELEC to act on something?
Yes. Especially when you're looking at
They can
42,000
initiate naman ang
barangays.
COMELEC.
We
But you can
if
also
we know.
initiate
If we
you-
know,
you
right,
see it
if we
for
know,
yourself
yeah.
with your.
But you're looking at 42,000 barangays.
Oh, nga, so how are you able to monitor it properly?
Well, again, the citizens are a very big help. The citizens are more empowered now. They report to us. And if they give us leads, we go follow up, and then we talk to them and ask them, do you want to file a case? If they want to file a case, and that's fine. If we have enough, we file our own case. So it's tulong-tulong lang talaga.
Okay.
But to say that you can have blanket coverage of the entire event, that's a little
42,000.
difficult. Yeah.
What about the party list group? Do you have any programs for this particular election period? for
No, we're not
barangay?
supposed to, we're not supposed to
Okay.
dip our fingers into this
Alright.
election.
Non-partisan.
Non-partisan po yan.
Alright.
Although kung minsan, hindi mo mariwasan, may mga candidates who think that you are still a vote deliverer. They come to you, pwede ba magpa-picture, sir? So, kami naman, okay, pwede kang tumabi sa akin, magpa-picture tayo, pero I will not raise your hand. Kasi the moment I do that, then I violate the election rule. Oh, so sige, pa-picture ka, pero posing lang tayo, lakbayan kita para I will never raise your hand.
Well, just on that point, because we have seen a lot of materials that include the mayor or a local congressman or whatever in their materials. What we do in cases people bring that to our attention is we ask for a copy of the material so that we'll know who printed it, and then we'll know the provenance basically of the material. No? One of our concerns is that there might have been material support given to the candidate, and that might open them up to charges of partisanship, which becomes a problem for them. But in general, like the congressman said, a lot of congressmen, a lot of elected officials do avoid even being in that position, and that we appreciate that very much.
Well, apart from what we mentioned earlier about what the role of the barangay is to the community, what about its role for the 2016 elections?
Very vital din yan.
Is a choice of a barangay captain?
Yeah, because pag nagkampanya ka, Ameline, kailangan meron kang grassroots support, especially if you are running for a national election. And the more barangays you have, barangay captains you have, the better chances you have. So, napaka-vital yan. No? So, ang dami na ngayon nagpa-participate, although they will never admit that they are already helping candidates. Pero marami nang tumutulong.
Hence the politicization of the barangay system. So, doon ang kagaling yun. And again, is it unavoidable? Perhaps. So, we have to deal with it as it comes, right? And that's why we're looking to Congress to find a way to fix it talaga. Ultimately, even Congress admits that the barangay system is a useful buttress, in bigger political ambitions. So that has to be addressed squarely also.
Also, just a few will the teachers receive additional pay? And what has the DBM said about this?
Well, the DBM has not said anything, but basically they're standing by the money that they've already given us. And what we can afford, we've already given. We're still working on augmentation for that, basically by asking for contributions from the barangays. At last look, I think we've had more than 100 million already, but we're still far short of the 400 million that we're targeting. There have also been reports coming back to us that some barangays have actually passed local ordinances saying that they will never, ever give us the money. But as far as augmentation is concerned, that's not, that's not the most likely thing to happen.
Okay, and lastly, we've already identified, I think the COMELEC has already identified, the security forces have already identified the major areas of concern.
Yes.
And there's already a task force by the joint task force by the PNP and the AFP.
Right.
Is there a possibility that some PNP officers might be deployed as election inspectors in areas where teachers have already said that they won't?
That's always been an option
there.
that's open to the COMELEC. In previous elections, we've had to replace teachers who refuse to show up to perform duties. But mostly, what we use are election cadets. Police cadets.
Okay.
Not the actual officers. Obviously, the officers have to be performing their other duties, but there are a lot of cadets who are upstanding members of their community who are disciplined and are able to take a lot of instruction. So we do field them sometimes.
Okay, and I guess the last question is, can you assure the public that security we will be safe in this barangay elections?
Absolutely. We can assure the public that they will be safe. We can assure the public that their votes will be counted correctly. But on the second one, I'd like to remind them that this is a manual election, which means that you have to take pains to actually write the name of the candidate. And when you have to write the name of the candidate, you have to write legibly. Unlike me, I write illegibly. So you have to write legibly, and as much as possible, you have to write the full name of the candidate to make sure that your vote gets counted.
Okay. Director Jimenez,
Thank you.
Congressman Valio, thank you
Yes,
so much
Arlene.
for joining us
Thank you
today.
very much.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have left. I would like to thank once again our guest, COMELEC spokesperson Director James Jimenez, and Congressman Silvestre Bebot Bello of the One BAP Party List for being with us tonight. Join us again next Thursday for another round of discussion here on News Cafe. Sitting in for Jing Magsaysay, I'm Amelin Veloso. Good night.